Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
You know, as if we don't have enough stuff to worry about as parents, we now have to worry about what's called sextortion. And especially with kids, you know, the scammers are targeting them and it's getting worse. You know, they've always been a vulnerable part of society. And if these scammers can get to your kids, then wow, you know, what a way to get to you and to cause all sorts of damage. Hey, everybody, it's Jared. We're going to talk about this on another episode of All Things Crime. I want to welcome you. Want to encourage you to hit subscribe and definitely hit that bell so that you don't miss an episode. And please share the episode, share the podcast with everybody. We appreciate all the new listeners and viewers that have come on. We're on Rumble now. And so you can go to YouTube, Rumble, or wherever you get your podcasts, you know, Spotify, those kind of places. So thank you again for listening. And man, I have a really interesting episode that I think you guys are going to enjoy. I saw a headline this morning and it was talking about, I'll read part of it. It's basically saying that the headline is predators targeting more teens with sextortion scams. So let's talk about what is sextortion, first of all. Before we do that, I want to talk about a little bit of phishing emails. I'm sure everybody out there has gotten a phishing email or a text before. And basically, and I'm not talking FISH, you know, the little buggers that are in the streams and lakes that we're always trying to catch, that always seem to elude our best fly and whatever. No, this is the PFISH. So, you know, phishing text is when you like click on something and these guys, they'll send you a link and you click on it. And so immediately you have like a virus in your computer, or, you know, they can do all sorts of crazy things with these phishing emails. They can lock up your computer and your data. You know, you've seen entire hospitals get held hostage and they have to pay, you know, millions of dollars in order to get their entire computer network unlocked so that they can go back to business and treating patients. You know, you see this stuff all the time, but there's also all of these, you know, there's the prince from Nairobi that has all this money that wants to invest so you can get that way board. You know, they'll send emails to like your grandmother and they'll say, hey, this is your grandson, Scotty, and I'm in prison in Mexico and I need you to send me $1,200 or something like that. And it's, you know, all of these crazy phishing emails and things. Usually it's targeting people that have financial resources that they can try to scam from you. And they play on all sorts of emotions, you know, whether it be, you know, like I said, grandma helping the grandson or whatever, you know, you're stuck, you can't do business until you pay us, whatever. So, but the crazy thing about this sextortion is they're now using sex to, especially with teenagers. They said that between the ages of 13 and 17, this is happening a lot more frequently. And so what these people will do is they will create a profile, and you've seen all these crazy profiles that, you know, they're supposedly these beautiful Chinese women, and that's the one I see all the time, you know, especially on LinkedIn and places like that. But they're these bots, you know, they're not real, they're definitely not, you know, the actual models or whatever pictures they have, but, you know, you can have Ukrainian women and whatever. But these beautiful girls, beautiful women are setting up these profiles, or guys are probably setting up these profiles using those pictures. Well, then they are sending teenagers, especially teenage boys, they're sending these, you know, messages, and they're trying to coax them into taking a graphic picture of themselves or of something else and sending it to them. So as soon as they do that, and you know, it's another crazy trend is how many teenagers nowadays just don't even think about not only the damage that they can do to themselves and to others, the psychological type of a damage, but it's illegal. You cannot send nude pictures of a minor over the internet, and but aside from that, just looking at the morals, basically what they do is once they can get you to send a picture, and I'm sure if it starts, well, I don't even know how to do it, but bottom line is they'll eventually coax you into, or coax, some young boy, and maybe even young girls are doing this, but I would think, being a man and having gone through that phase, that boys would be much more susceptible to this than girls would be. But nowadays, who knows? Essentially, once they can get you to send a picture that is somewhat compromising, then they'll say, we're either going to plaster this all over the internet or you send us $100. Well, how many other, especially the young kids, that they may have $100 or they can get it, they can get it from their parents or whatever. Well, if they send this scammer this $100, well, then it just escalates, because then they use that against them. So not only do they have the graphic picture, but now they have the history that you've sent us money. So they know that you're hooked, and then it goes up and up and up, maybe to 100, then a couple of hundred, and then eventually they're not going to be able to pay it anymore. So that's when even the parents get involved and say, well, your kid has sent us $500, and we have these graphic pictures, and we're going to plaster it all over the internet if you don't continue to pay us or whatever. So it just escalates from there, and it's super, super hard to track these people down, because most of them are going to be overseas. I've actually got scammed on, or they tried to scam me based on a couch that I had listed on a local newspaper and a local classifieds. And these people they had the scam that was going on. Basically, they'd text you saying, hey, we want to buy your couch, and if you send this money, it includes not only, or we will send you a check, and the check you can deposit it, but the check is going to be for the couch. They'll pay top dollar for the couch. They don't even try to negotiate you down. Pay top dollar for the couch and the shipping expenses. So they send you, like, say you're selling your couch for $500. They send you a check for $800, and you take this check and go deposit it, and then you send them the couch. You ship them the couch somewhere. Well, it's gone. And then the check bounces, 2 or 3 days later, and now you're out of your couch and you're out of the money that you're supposed to get. So, and then they have your banking account information. So you're screwed no matter what you do. And, these scammers get so sophisticated on some of the things that they do. They know their target audience. These guys, honestly, are some of the best marketers in the world, because they know their target audience. They know exactly how to emotionally, pull the heartstrings and get people to do basically stupid things. And they look legit. A lot of them will attach a logo of a legitimate company, like a UPS or something like that. They'll attach the logo to it so that the signature block looks authentic. They know how to make not only profiles like on social media, like what we were talking about with the sextortion with the teenagers, but also, they can send you an email that looks legitimate from the company that they're saying they're from. So, and there's all sorts of ways that these people, they know what they're doing, and they're professionals at it. And the better they get, the more money they make. And there's so many people that we're so busy, and we just don't naturally expect that we're getting scammed, that we'll do things that we wouldn't normally do. And that's definitely a major problem with just in general. It's crazy, all the stuff that's out there. But, back to this sextortion thing. And the reason it caught my eye was I was just like, wow, really? Sextortion, they're using this and they're targeting teenagers. So not only are they're getting, people to send illegal pictures around, but they're also, they're extorting the financial, obviously, but it's causing an uptick in the suicides. And, kids they're so distraught about what is happening. and the threat that, their pictures, whatever they sent, especially if it's a really graphic one, they're they're offing themselves. And so it's just a tragic situation all the way around. So just give you a couple of stats here. They said the data shows a 20% jump in reported cases during a 6-month period that ended in March 2023. So I think, especially with COVID and everybody was locked down and everybody was on their computers, is probably when a lot of this really started. But just getting access to children through their phones. How many kids are putting out personal information out there that maybe they establish an Instagram account or something like that. Well, all of a sudden, if you put too much information about yourself on the internet, it's out there, and people will grab it, and they'll find your phone number, and then they have all this information. But even just getting your profiles, shooting an Instagram DM, they can access your kids in ways that, like when I was a kid, that's kind of stuff just it wasn't even a possibility. Of course, when I was a kid, crap, man, we had the walls were still stuck or the phones were still stuck on the side of the wall. And in fact, I don't know if you can see right behind me, I've got my dad's original Motorola phone that he used in the very first car phone that he had. And you had to plug it into the cigarette lighter, and it had the big dial, and the thing weighs like 20 pounds. But we thought that was the coolest thing. Of course, it cost like $3 a minute that you were that you were on that thing. So if you had a 10-minute phone call, boy, that added up really fast. But anyway, nowadays everybody has a phone. Everybody has, and it's a smartphone. It's not just a texting. There's very few kids that even have a flip phone or anything that you're just kind of limited to texting. Everybody has a smartphone nowadays, and the ages are getting younger and younger. And boy, whether or not that's detrimental or advantageous for a kid, boy, studies are going to come out. And I think the long term, obviously, is it's detrimental. But I don't know. I've got 3 teenage boys. Have a a 18, 19-year-old daughter now that, even back when she was 15, and we finally gave in to her pleadings and gave, let her have a smartphone. Whether that was good or not, we'll see. But definitely having kids that are still developing, they're in their single digits, 8, 9 years old, see some of these kids walking around with a smartphone. It's just, I don't know. Anyway, the bottom line is these scammers are getting smarter. They know how to target your kids. And, you combine that, they're getting smarter with kind of what's happening with social media. And I really like videos from the experts like Andrew Huberman and Jordan Peterson, Sadie Kahn, those that are talking about the dynamics that social media especially is how it's changing our relationship between boys and girls, men and women. And it's amazing that, well, the basic truth is you can have an average looking woman, and she can put herself out there like on Instagram and get a huge amount of interaction compared to the same level. Say this girl's like a 6, and on a scale of 1 to 10, which I don't really like, but regardless, if she can put information out, or put herself out there, and she'll get a huge amount of interaction compared to the same age male who is also like a 6, an average looking guy, and he'll put something out there and get almost no interaction. So and you combine that with even the trend of the women focusing more on the top 10, 15, maybe 20% of men, and they're getting all the interaction, and the other 80% is just like completely being ignored. So that's happening in reality, and in physically when you go to bars and dating and things like that. But it's also happening on social media. And so essentially what is happening is that is causing 80 to 90% of the entire male population is just starved for attention. So you have this crazy dynamic of, all these men, all these, and especially young men, teenagers, that their hormones are just raging. I have, like I said, I have some teenagers right now, and one of them in particular, he's almost 14. This kid, he is as girl crazy as you can get, man. And it's just, everybody, especially every young man goes through this phase eventually. And we just all go through it in different times. But, once they start noticing girls, man, it's over. It is from then until like they get married. They are just girl crazy. And, it's been that way for ever, ever since mankind has came onto this earth. It's, you think about, you read back in the Bible, you read back in the Iliad, and there's all sorts of, books and things that were written thousands of years ago. What was the primary motivator that every man did, these marvelous feats, or, the face that launched 1,000 ships, Helen of Troy, those kind of things, David, King Solomon, all of them. Here are these men that had basically everything, and then they would see some beautiful woman bathing on top of a roof, and that is just that, seeing that, because men are so visually oriented. And that's another thing that so many, I don't think so many women understand, is that men are 100% visually oriented. It's like, that's why when a beautiful woman can walk in the room, it immediately attracts the attention of every man that's in the room, because all they have to do is see a beautiful shaped woman and a beautiful woman, and man, it's wow. They she immediately has every guy's attention. Well, women are touch oriented, and so it's totally different. But you obviously, when you view the world, you view the world based on what and who you are. And so that's how it just, how many disagreements and misunderstandings happen, because we just don't see the world in someone else's eyes or in someone else's shoes. And so, of course you're going to misunderstand it. It's not you. You just don't understand it. But, you know, these marketers that are targeting these young men, they understand the dynamics of everything that's going on right now, including how lonely a lot of these young men are. And they're so desperate for this attention that if if you're a young man and you're desperate for this attention, you're lonely, you get sent a picture in your Instagram DM or wherever, and she's saying, "Hey, I really like your profile. You're a good looking guy. Man, I would really like to meet you. Here's just my picture." And all of a sudden he's like, "Wow, I've got some attention. This is just incredible. I what do I do?" And so she said, "Hey, send me a picture. Send me, one of your pictures." And so initially, maybe it just sends a picture of his face, and then she said, "Oh, I'd really like to see, your muscles or whatever." I don't know how these things go. I'm almost creeping myself out here, but you can just in your imagination just kind of go through what the the system of how this is happening. I'm sure they actually have a script. They say the first picture it's this, if you get a face picture, ask them for another one, or and just try to develop this relationship and this correspondence, and eventually you're going to have these boys, especially sending pictures that they have no business sending, and then bam, they got them. Well, as soon as you send a real compromising picture like that, it's on. And that's when the sextortion stuff can start happening. And I'm sure it is going to happen on a increasing basis. And that's why we've got to educate these young people. Just look, that's just not reality, man. You got to be smarter about this. But it says in the article, it says the data reflects more than 13,000 nationwide reports of online financial sextortion of teenagers between October 21 and November of 23. So the cases include at least 20 victims who died by suicide. So out of all of these, it reached a point where it was so traumatizing to these teenagers, these victims, that they killed themselves. And that's, the tragedy of it is, is beyond belief. And I'll tell you one thing right now: the people on the other end of this do not care. They are the same type of people that are doing this human trafficking that's coming across the border that we've talked about so much. The same people that when I was down in Panama, the Darien Gap, I saw all these families coming across. A lot of them have young kids. We don't know whose kids those are, whether they're actually in those families or they're just being trafficked. And I also saw an article just the other day that said, more and more kids are showing up at the border with different parents, different, parents in quotation marks. And so especially men, if they're a single man coming across, then they're recycling these kids. So these kids are coming across, they're then disappearing because DHS right now is just, don't get me too far on the whole border thing. But these kids are then being recycled, being brought back into Mexico, hooked up with another quote family, and it's probably just another single guy that wants to come across that has a real shady past that doesn't want to get caught, and they'll go right across with the same kid. So Border Patrol is actually starting to, they're saying they're seeing the same kids coming across with different people, with different adults. So they know that this kid is just simply being trafficked and recycled, and who knows what kind of abuse these children, both male and female, are going through. It's just sick. Well, it's the same people. They do not care. All they want is your money, and all they want is whatever you have, and they are as evil comes. And we've got to get smart on this. We've got to be aware. We have to understand how much our kids are being targeted. Their pornography and the school libraries, the different curriculums that are just all jacked up. They are coming after our kids full bore. And if we don't get smart, and if we don't really, protect our children, then they are going to fall to this kind of thing. And I don't check my kids' phones as much as I should. And I know my wife and I need to do better on that, just because, you know, we think we want to be friends with them and we think we want to, that they're too smart for this. I'm telling you, they're not. And it's our job to protect them. So, guys, I just wanted to bring this up. I wanted to make a quick episode and throw this out at you. So, if you haven't ever heard of sextortion, look it up and read about it. And it is crazy. The grooming that is happening. There's another little part of this article. It says most victims are boys ages 13 to 17 who are targeted and groomed by online predators that pose as teenage girls on social media. Offenders trick teenagers into sending them sexually explicit pictures and then threaten to release the material if the victim doesn't pay up. And just here in the Salt Lake area, which also includes Idaho, Utah, and Montana, they're saying 10 to 12 new cases every week. And that's just what's being reported. So, it's probably 5 times that it's actually happening. So that's a lot of new cases. And I tell you, there's a lot of people gunning after your kids, we've got to protect them. So, all right, guys, I just wanted to throw this out at you and hope you're doing well. Definitely let us know what you think. So make some comments down in the comment section. And again, please subscribe and share this information with people that you know. And man, we've got to get the word out that your kids, I guarantee it doesn't matter where you are. You can be in small town America, in Nebraska, or anything else, and your kids are not safe. They are being targeted through, and it's so easy nowadays. Every single one of, well, I can't say every single one, but most homes have Wi-Fi, most homes have internet, and most kids have a smartphone that they have access to all this information. And they're probably pretty good at hiding it from you too. So it's time for everybody to sit down and have a really good discussion with them, and even go over some of these videos, that like what I said, Andrew Huberman, and he's a neuropsychologist out of Stanford. The guy's brilliant. But some of the things that he was talking about, he's, made videos about, how the brain develops and everything like that. it's not only fascinating, but it's scary too, because, the bad guys are learning this stuff as well. They are learning how to better target. They're marketers, they're professionals, and they're evil, but regardless, they are professional enough that they do their research. They know how to target your children in ways better than you do. So let's get at it. Let's protect our kids and keep society functioning, because the worse it gets out there, if we don't counter that with good, then we'll lose, and that's just not optional. So, all right, guys, hope you have a great week, and we will talk at you later.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.